Steam has thousands of games. A lot of these are great projects that you can sink your teeth into and spend hundreds of hours losing yourself in the bounds of their worlds. But on the other side are projects that are so bad they make you regret the fact that you bought them, and even spent your time trying them out. Scams, cash grabs, even just poorly optimized projects. But if you want the real gems beneath the garbage, you're going to have to wade through the muck, because that other side isn't all bad. Sometimes a diamond can be found here or there, and that's what I'm here for. Today, I'm going to be taking another look at 10 of the worst reviewed games on Steam. I chose different projects from among the mixed, negative, and overwhelmingly negatives. If you've seen this series before, then you already know that I try to give each game on this list a fair shake. I attempt to see both the good and the bad with each title. My intention is not just to trash all of these poorly received games, but to see where they failed, and maybe where they succeed. If you enjoy this video, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, as it really helps me out. Hey Dad, it's me, your favorite son, and today I'd like to once again talk about bad games. Clash of the Monsters is a horror fighting game developed by Cadence Games. It was released on April 13th, 2016, and currently has mixed review status on Steam, with 377 total reviews, 52% of those being positive. Clash of the Monsters is a fighting game that features a roster of horror film figures. The selection is quite small, only totaling 7 characters in all. Hell, even Masters of Terraskasi had more characters than that. This is a symptom of the first problem that Clash of the Monsters has going for it, a massive lack of variety. With a short list of characters, the game also only features a handful of stages, 2 of which are black and white versions of the other 2 stages, and the moveset for each character is very simple, only offering us a few combos and specials to build out our character's kit. In Clash of the Monsters, we have 2 kick buttons, 2 punch buttons, and a throw button. Combining these together in a variety of ways will allow us to pull off special moves that are generally unique to our character. A big problem with the game, though, is that none of these characters really feel that distinct from one another. They generally all kind of function the same. Combat is comprised of this weird speed up and slow down cadence that feels so odd when implemented. Attacking is incredibly quick, and responding to any sort of action is incredibly slow. It's the shock of going 100 miles an hour suddenly slowed to the crawl of 25. And if attacking characters feels clunky and weird, playing against the AI in this game is one of the most unfortunate things I've had the pleasure of taking part in. The AI is programmed to just constantly spam combos, about 90% of which it generally pulls off. We can block enemy attacks by holding the back button with our character, classic Tekken style, but the enemy AI is just designed to constantly be on the offensive. They rarely block and will only start to play defense if we start mashing different combos ourselves. It honestly feels like playing a fighting game against your little cousin who had never played the game before, so he's just randomly smashing his fist into the face buttons and somehow he wins every time, because how the hell are you supposed to play against something like this? The game also just looks really ugly. The characters are all designed like discount versions of the characters they're based on. Like, what the fuck is wrong with Nosferatu? The Living Dead and Bones characters are probably the only 2 that I would say look halfways decent. There is one character in this game that is just absolutely astounding, and that's the Invisible Man. He's exactly what he sounds like, an invisible man. You can't see what he's doing, you can't see his attacks coming, you just kind of have to guess when you're fighting him. It's honestly insane that this idea even made it into the game, because it's a horrible one. I'm not sure why they didn't just go with the classic bandaged sunglasses look. I think that would have made for another interesting character, and if you wanted to make him actually invisible, just give him that special ability, or include it as an alternate costume or something. It just feels like a lazy effort by the developer to include what is technically another character without having to do any work. and I'm honestly surprised that there weren't more classic monster characters in this. Frankenstein, Dracula, the creature from the Black Lagoon, Wolfman. There's a ton of opportunity here to have a good fighting game with this genre of classic characters, but it doesn't feel like the developer wanted to go that far with it. The game also lacks content outside of characters, stages, and movesets. The game really only has a few modes: arcade, where you fight single matches against the AI, two-player mode, where you can play local, online mode, and training. That's basically it. Clash of the Monsters is a very bare-bones fighting game, one that tries to set itself apart inherently by choosing established horror characters as its foundation. A good decision when it comes to hook, style, and marketing, but this one good decision is followed up by a ton of bad ones, and a general lack of follow-through. I'm sure this game would have appealed to a particular audience. I am not a part of that audience, but even with the disappointing result, Clash of the Monsters still garnered 377 reviews. Classic horror fans have been historically known to support anything that even slightly caters to them, so this was a recipe for success. And the bones are there. No, literally, a character named Bones is in this game, but the rest was never really fleshed out. It just feels like if Cadence had given a extra 20% to the characters, an extra 20% to the stages, and an extra 20% to the AI, this game could have at least found a niche audience that would have supported it. And this review states it better than I ever could. This game is But come on, this game came 9 years and its full release. How to AI is a dumbass baton masher the AI can't do but spam the moves ripped from SF4 and that mobile game Stickman Fight Neon Warriors. The whole game is a mess, buggy piece of but I'm pretty sure the dev that made the game must be on crack making this. 1 out of 10, don't play it. Orcs Must Die Deathtrap is a third-person tower defense game developed by Robot Entertainment. It was released on January 28, 2025 and currently has mixed review status on Steam with 2,263 total reviews, 68% of those being positive. Orcs Must Die Deathtrap is the most recent entry in a long-running series. The first Orcs Must Die was released in 2011 to great success. I remember playing this game and its sequel quite a lot over the years. They were both incredibly addicting games that saw you defending a rift against orcs that were trying to enter it, placing traps, attacking enemies, crafting creative ways to funnel orcs into your brutal, torture-filled defenses was endless amounts of fun. I look back very fondly on both of these games because they were just very well made. The series would falter a bit over the years as the next entry was Orcs Must Die Unchained, a game that was negatively received and has now been removed from the Steam store entirely. Robot Entertainment would win audiences back with the third entry in the series, a return to form and an expansion into some larger ideas like war scenarios. But 4 years later, the newest entry in the Orcs Must Die series has been released. So is it another falter in the line of this once beloved franchise, or a new step in the right direction? My answer to this question is that it's somehow a bit of both. All of the Orcs Must Die games have one thing in common: they're all tower defense games. The main goal is to protect our rift, and that hasn't changed with this entry. We must place traps during the initial setup phase around the battlefield. These traps are meant to kill or damage waves of orcs before they reach our rift. If they manage to reach our rift, they will enter it, and our rift counter will reduce by 1. If that counter reaches 0, then we lose. This general concept and setup is pretty much the same throughout the series, but what does Deathtrap introduce that makes it less desirable than the other entries? Well, first of all, Deathtrap is more co-op, always online, and large map focused than the previous games. In Deathtrap, we have a hub world that we travel to in between missions. Here we can spend currencies to upgrade our traps and our character. We start the game by picking one of 6 pre-made characters: Vaughn, Ren, Harlow, Mac, Kalos, and Sophie. Each character has their own unique abilities, weapons, and playstyles. We can luckily change the character we use at any time, and 90% of the upgrades that you make aren't tied to that specific character, so you never really feel like you have to restart from scratch. Unfortunately, I wanted to use daggers, which meant that I was stuck playing a fucking cat. After choosing our character, we're allowed to start running missions, but before that, Deathtrap does something that I absolutely hate. For some reason, I cannot stand when games replace a tutorial section with videos. It's possibly the worst implementation of a tutorial that you could choose. You're not engaged at all, you're just waiting for the timer to tick down, and so many of the tutorial videos in Deathtrap are full of jokes and fluff that I just stopped watching them and decided to figure the game out on my own.
I'm on thin ice with Master Gabs. You make one wrong turn, disappear for a couple of years, and suddenly you're irresponsible. Ugh.
In Deathtrap, we'll take on defense missions at different rifts on different maps. Deathtrap is going for a sort of roguelike structure because on beginning each mission, we have to choose one of 3 modifiers, which usually make the mission slightly harder. These can ensure that a certain enemy is spawned with every wave, it can ensure that certain enemies are stronger, or give us a chance to spawn enemies when others die. When we start the mission, our goal is the same as the other games, to place traps and prevent orcs from getting to our rift. We have a certain amount of currency to spend on placing traps, and we generate more of that currency when killing enemies. We have to survive for 6 total waves before the mission is complete, and based on how well we did, we will be granted a certain amount of skulls. These skulls are the currency that is used back at the hub world to upgrade traps, upgrade the game overall, or our character specifically. At the end of the day, I do have a problem with this roguelike system, because I don't think it works particularly well. After we complete the 6th wave of a mission, we will get the option to leave back to the hub world with the skulls we've earned, or we can roll the dice and wager around half of them and continue to another, slightly harder mission for a better reward. This choice, given to the player, is kind of a strange one that mostly felt out of place in this game. I wanted to secure the skulls that I had, but I also wanted to keep playing, so the only option is to head back to the hub world and then start another match, which is kind of annoying. Also, it just kind of feels unnecessary because if you wager and lose, then you feel like it would have been more advantageous to just grind for the smaller amounts of skulls. But if you do that, then you feel like there's more to be had by wagering. It's almost a lose-lose design because it constantly feels like there is a better decision to be made somewhere else. On top of that, Deathtrap's map designs aren't nearly as well crafted as previous games. I went and played Orcs Must Die 3 for this review. It was the most recent game released in the series before Deathtrap, and it was the only entry that I had never had the experience of playing. Now, of course, that game is a story-focused endeavor, but the maps start out very small, generally consisting of one entry point for the orcs, and grow into much larger affairs, with multiple points of entry, forks for orcs to travel down, and a variety of different paths to the rift. This slowly introduces the player to the concepts of the game and gradually increases the intensity of gameplay. That's just not present in Deathtrap at all. You immediately start on a massive map that, across the 6 waves, will introduce 4 to 5 different orc spawn points. In both Deathtrap and Orcs Must Die 3, while we're planning out our defenses, we can see where the orcs will travel to get to the rift. If we block off one of those paths, they'll generally take a longer but more open path around. Once we've blocked off all the paths they can take, the forces will then generally split across multiple blocked off paths to try and destroy barricades and get inside. Because the maps in Deathtrap are so open, it makes far more sense to build your defenses close to the rift. This enables you to get more bang for your buck and spend less money by placing less defenses. This is almost the opposite of what you do in Orcs Must Die 3, for example. You would focus on placing defenses closer to the spawn point because it made more sense, and just clean orcs up as you go. Most of the traps also end up very ineffective in Deathtrap, especially at the beginning of the game. They feel weak, and don't even get me started on ceiling traps. Alright, you got me started on ceiling traps. In most Orcs Must Die games, there are floor traps, wall traps, and ceiling traps. Ceiling traps can be particularly effective at dealing with small rooms and low ceilings. Turrets that can be placed on the roof or beams that shoot down from the ceiling can wipe out groups of orcs. Much of Deathtrap takes place in large-scale maps that are focused on exterior areas rather than interiors. Even if there are interior-focused maps, oftentimes the ceilings are not meant for ceiling traps, communicated by vaulted ceilings or the fact that the game just won't let you place one there. This is terrible design because it effectively makes the ceiling traps that are included in the game an edge case, leaving the player to focus on floor and wall traps, and drastically reducing the size of the traps that they can place. This doesn't mean that there aren't small areas where we can place ceiling traps, but they're few and far between. And some of these issues are fixed if you play with a group of friends. Obviously, ceiling traps will stay messed up until more ceiling space is introduced with map redesigns, but the scale of the maps is reduced if you have one person covering each quadrant of it. But that's a moot point because you are allowed to play the game solo. If you can play the game solo, then it should be just as good as playing the game with other people. All that being said, I didn't have a terrible time playing Deathtrap. The variety in how the characters play is actually pretty well done. Playing with Sophie or Vaughn felt like playing two different versions of the game. I don't think that Deathtrap is a bad game by any means, but when I went back and played Orcs Must Die 3, I found myself having a lot more fun. That game was something I couldn't really tear myself away from, even though I didn't need to play it a ton for this video. Deathtrap really just feels like it's introducing a lot of stuff that the series doesn't really need. The team seems like it was focused on making a game that players would continue to return to, a pseudo always online model that would keep players coming back again and again. But I think fans would have been genuinely happy and showed up if they just came up with some more interesting trap ideas, made some genuinely interesting maps, and introduced some character variety into their already pretty successful formula. Deathtrap isn't some terrible car crash travesty, it just isn't really something that I can see myself sinking a ton of hours into. Real Pharmacy Simulator is a simulation game developed by Mannered Monster and was released on December 20th, 2024. It currently has mostly negative review status on Steam with 10 total reviews, 20% of those being positive. Real Pharmacy Simulator is a game that seeks to capitalize on the success of the simulator genre, seemingly taking inspiration from recent smash hits like TCG Card Shop Simulator. In Real Pharmacy Simulator, you run a pharmacy, order medicines, and check out customers. Or at least, that's what you should be doing. What you really do in Real Pharmacy Simulator is try to interact with the broken framework of the game and attempt to understand how it's actually supposed to work. First of all, this game is still in early access and doesn't currently have a story mode, just a simple mode. The simple mode is so simple that it makes no sense at all. As we start the game, we are met with a foreboding message. Today is your first day. Do your best to make sure it's not the last. What the hell? Are we about to get attacked? Is an assassination attempt in the works? Are we sure we're about to be working at a pharmacy? Heading inside the building before we've even had a chance to get a grasp on the systems, customers are already pouring inside. We're given a few boxes of medicines and we can stock them on the shelves, but customers are already trying to buy stuff and pick up prescriptions. Based on the floating wall text tutorials, we're supposed to pick up a basket and fill it with the items that the customer's requesting. We are then supposed to scan those items and place them in the basket and set the basket on the counter. Once this is done, we can total the items and request payment from the customer. But what if we don't have the items that the customer requests? Well, then we have to refuse them service, which they really don't like. A lot of Real Pharmacy Simulator's biggest issues arise from the fact that it's just not a game that's even close to being finished at all. The whole system doesn't seem to work. First of all, why would you even allow customers to request items that we don't start out with on the first day? I ended up having to turn away more than half of the customers in the store. A game like this should probably start out slowly, giving you 1 or 2 items to manage on the first day and introducing more complex lists of products as the game goes on. Right from the get-go, we have somewhere from 8 to 10 products to manage with incredibly complex names and customers that are requesting products we don't even have. On top of that, this system is just so incredibly confusing and unintuitive. I briefly compared Real Pharmacy Simulator to something like TCG Card Shop Simulator, a game that released last year in early access and one that has been an incredible success for the developer. That game isn't that polished either, with pretty crude models and environments, but the gameplay loop that it creates is so addicting. In Card Shop Simulator, you run a TCG card shop, stock shelves with products that customers might want, and check them out when they're ready to buy. First of all, the checkout system is smooth. You just hold the mouse button down to swipe through the items they've laid out on the counter and either give them change or enter their total into the credit card system. This requires some engagement from the player, but not a ton. It's a task that's repeatable easily, time and time again. Real Pharmacy Simulator makes this same system incredibly complex by requiring you to actually ask the customer whether they want to pay with cash or card. This adds another step to the whole system that provides nothing. It doesn't make the system more engaging, just more tedious. Not to mention the fact that a large part of the appeal of TCG Card Shop Simulator was the fact that not only are you working a boring job in a card shop, but that you can also partake in your hobby of ripping card packs open. Real Pharmacy Simulator doesn't have this level of appeal or silver lining. There seems to be plans to expand the game to have it include some sort of system where you can grow not so medicinal plants in the back room, but I just don't think there's enough here to bring people in. Maybe some who are really interested in being pharmacy technicians someday, but to access a market outside of those people, your systems need to be incredibly engaging and smooth. To play devil's advocate here a little bit, Real Pharmacy Simulator has only been in early access for a couple of months and has been updated as recently as a month ago in January of 2025. So it's possible that the developer can turn this game into something worth buying, but right now the game is unfinished and barely functional, not even close to ready for an early access state. Civilization VII is a strategy game developed by Firaxis Games. It was released on February 10th, 2025 and currently has mixed review status on Steam with 21,287 total reviews, 51% of those being positive. Sid Meier's Civilization is a part of a long-running series of strategy games that began in the early 90s. The 7th game is the most recent entry in the series and looks to not only upgrade and improve on the formula of the past games, but also to try and innovate and change the dynamic of how that game works. I am a fan of the Civilization games. I remember playing Civilization 3 on my dad's computer when I was a kid and barely comprehending the game at all. I remember getting Civilization 5 as one of the first games I actually purchased on my own computer and playing it for hours on end. And when Civilization 6 released, it immediately captured my attention as I sunk hours into it. And it pains me to put Civilization 7 on this list because I was actually pretty excited for it. I love strategy games in general, and when a strategy game is well made and it grips you, you can end up putting hundreds of hours into it. It's an addicting feeling. The classic "one more turn" motto that has colored the Civilization series rings true. And I'm sad to say that Civilization 7 just doesn't currently fit this bill. If you aren't familiar with the series, Civilization is a game that sees you taking control of a, civilization in the aim of developing the culture, economy, military, diplomacy, and science of that community. You control towns and cities in the interest of producing new buildings that can introduce a variety of different benefits. You can make new units like soldiers that defend your borders or attack others, settlers that can found new cities, and traders that can bring resources into your nation. To win a game of Civ, you must target a specific area of development. To get a science victory, you have to usually progress towards launching a manned mission into space or some sort of rocket program. To get a culture victory, you generally have to obtain a large draw to your nation through tourism and attractions. To get a domination victory, you have to conquer the other leaders in the world, so on and so forth. From what I've played of Civilization 7, there are two large problems that I have with the game as it currently stands. First of all, let's get the easy one out of the way. This UI freaking stinks. People that are far more familiar with the series have made pretty intense breakdowns on why this UI fails when compared to the previous games in the series. I won't be going that in depth, but I think my points can be illustrated by just comparing the Civ 7 UI with that of Civ 6. First of all, everything in the Civ 7 UI is just way too big. Because it's so chunky, it leaves the game feeling far more simple than it was before. This could be a good thing, except for the fact that this game still has a ton of complexity. The information just isn't available up front, at least not as much as it was in the past. I generally believe that this is because Firaxis designed the UI with console in mind, and I understand that they probably want to appeal to the console market because it's grown for them so much over the years. Civ went from being a PC-only game to a massive series that caters to both audiences, but isn't that what ports are for? Designing games so that they work well on different systems. It kind of feels like PC players now get a downgraded version of the game and suffer the consequences of the game becoming more popular in other places. This isn't even factoring in the general aesthetic design. This is just talking about information. Look at how simple these blocks are on these submenus. There's this weird gradient that doesn't really do much to provide depth to the right side. The icons all look really out of place and the whole thing is just too chunky for this screen. I honestly think they would fix most of their issues if everything just wasn't so big. The UI is my first main complaint, but honestly, it's a complaint that can be fixed by the development team. Firaxis has already released a statement that a UI rework is on the horizon. They are genuinely listening to player feedback, so I have confidence that this will be changed in the future. The second issue is a little bit more tricky. So Civilization 7 takes a bit of an odd approach to the structure of a Civilization game. Unlike other games in the series, Civ 7 is split into 3 distinct ages. We start out in the Antiquity Age, and as certain milestones are reached, we will progress into the next age, the Age of Exploration, which is fine in general, but when this age transition begins, the game comes to a screeching halt. We're taken out of the game and back into the main menu. The game has us choose a new culture, and then we jump back into the game. This whole transition is sandwiched by 2 loading screens in and out of the actual game itself. When we get back into the game, our current units are replaced with units from this age, and any wars that we were in before the age ended are stopped. This happens once again when the second age ends, and it's just so odd every single time. A big reason it feels so awkward is because the game doesn't give you a ton of time to get your affairs in order before the age transitions. Once the age progression meter hits 100%, you have 1 turn before things change. In one of the games that I was playing, an ally called on me to help them in a war, and I obliged. I mustered my forces and took them to the front lines of the enemy city. When I started attacking the city, the age changed to exploration, and when I got back in the game, the war was no more, and all my forces were back in my cities. I don't hate the new age system, and I do think it's generally a pretty good idea on how to change the Civ formula. Obviously, you can't just make Civ 6 again because there's no reason to do that, and there's a diminishing return on just introducing new buildings or civilizations. So I don't mind innovation in the series, and the ages mechanic could be implemented well, but in its current state, it just feels clunky. Also, some of the largest appeal to the previous Civilization games was how addicting the games were. Like I said, when I was in high school, staying up late and playing Civilization was a problem. Just one more turn was a literal phrase that I muttered to myself 100 times before my actual real last turn. But Civ 7 just doesn't have that same level of constant progression. And these age transition segments feel like natural breaking points, times when you realize you should probably stop playing. It breaks up that one more turn feeling that the series has always had going for it. Like I said, this is not a deep dive into all of the problems that Civ 7 currently has. I'm not the only one that's currently dissatisfied with the game, and I'm sure that there are others that are far more knowledgeable on the series and its changes. But as someone who has really enjoyed these games over the years and likes to play a match of Civ every once in a while, until the game is radically changed, I don't really think Civ 7 will be the game that I'm playing. Graven is a first-person action-adventure game developed by Slipgate Ironworks. It was released on January 23, 2024, and currently has mixed review status on Steam with 901 total reviews, 59% of those being positive. Graven is a really strange game to categorize. The story sees us playing a priest that has been exiled. We begin as we're left by a stranger in a boat to fend for ourselves in the local swamps. On one hand, Graven feels like a first-person RPG. The world design is generally pretty open, with branching paths to different areas and secrets neatly tucked away all over the place. But at the same time, it lacks any of the customization of that genre and leans more on the side of a story-focused Quake with a small magic system. Throughout Graven, we'll take on different quests, travel to different towns, and make war with the fiendish creatures that inhabit the wilds around this world. Our weapons in this war simply begin with a staff and a book. The book can be wielded to cast spells as long as we have the mana to do so. The staff is a melee weapon meant to bludgeon our enemies. We can gain a variety of other weapons later, like a crossbow to take out monsters from afar, and a short sword that quick slashes enemies and delivers devastating blows. The main problem that I have with Graven is, like I said, it feels like split design. It doesn't feel like this game truly knows what it wants to be. It seems that the goal here is to marry some different design philosophies, combining them into a larger, new whole. But the way that these parts are brought together doesn't really make something that cohesive. We still have the punishing constraints of something like Quake or Doom, where dying means starting back from a checkpoint, but now we lose gold. Gold that is picked up from enemies killed or chests and secrets hidden around the world. This gold can be used to buy new weapons, ammunition for our crossbow, or armor to absorb some of the damage when we're fighting. Most of the things that we buy, though, are temporary, and it feels like there should be more permanent upgrades. My criticism here is kind of ethereal, because a lot of Graven's failings are based in what it implies with its design and style. It feels like this game should be doing something else, but it isn't. At certain points, lifting barrels made me expect sim mechanics, but the game wasn't built for that. Heading to the blacksmith made me expect a variety of weapon upgrades, but the game doesn't seem to want to dole those out for less than an exorbitant amount of coin, or the weapons that are delivered in the linear level system. And a lot of the story of my experience with Graven was a story of expectation versus reality. And hey, maybe that was my fault. Maybe I was destined for disappointment because I was expecting this game to be something that it wasn't. Quests in the game are generally expecting you to go in one way and see you completing objectives to finish that quest, like the first one that we're given to clear out the local sewers of the piles of the dead that are blocking the water flow. It felt like this quest took me forever to complete because the sewers are laid out in such a weird way. There were stairways on the same level as each other heading in different directions. The levels are just built so odd, and the ultimate thing that I needed to find, barrels to blow up these bodies, were the last thing I found after combing through the sewers for a while. I got all of the secrets before I finally reached the objective. This is why I think Graven feels so odd, because on one hand the game feels so open and willing to let the player find their way, but styles itself a first-person fantasy shooter. Graven ends up caught somewhere in between, not really keeping the fast-paced action of its predecessors and not giving the player the customization that an RPG would. Graven is a distinctly odd project, but I can't say that it's not a polished game. It looks fantastic, and the combination of low-res models and a traversable world just looks very good. It feels like a place to play around in, and the story is pretty interesting. Graven is not a terrible game by any means, it's just a game that wasn't really for me. I can definitely see it working for some, and if it looks like something you'd be interested in, I'd recommend giving it a try, because it doesn't seem like a game made without love or care, but a genuine attempt at creating something new within a genre that the team was fond of. AEW Fight Forever is a wrestling game developed by UK's. It was released on June 29, 2023, and currently has mixed review status on Steam, with 1,156 total reviews, 59% of those being positive. Recently, I got back into watching professional wrestling, a pastime that I haven't regularly engaged in since around 2018 or 2019. But with the recent announcement that WWE was partnering with Netflix to show Raw live on their platform every week, I figured it was a great time to pick up where I left off. Of course, naturally, after catching up on WWE, I decided to check out AEW. If you aren't familiar, AEW is the second biggest wrestling promotion and only started in 2019. They're marketed in a bit of an edgier way than WWE is, and they seem to go a bit harder on the athleticism in wrestling, more consistent high-flying stuff. Of course, WWE has owned the professional wrestling market for a long time, and that extends to the professional wrestling video game market. Tons of different series in the 90s and 2000s have all been filtered down into one franchise, WWE 2K. But in the same way that AEW tries to compete for their share of the market of professional wrestling, they also released a game to try and compete for the same gaming market as well. AEW Fight Forever is weird, and I do have a lot of problems with it, but let's start off with the pros. First of all, I think the game is pretty simple and easy to understand. This was always a barrier to entry for me when it came to wrestling games. For years, I avoided the likes of the WWE 2K games because from the outside, they just seemed so damn complicated. Compared to a regular fighting game, there was another literal dimension here to concern yourself with. Tons of moves to remember, inputs, and a whole new control scheme to get used to. AEW Fight Forever makes that beginning stretch a little bit less daunting, and I want to stress the word little here. It doesn't completely get rid of it, but the game is a bit easier to pick up and put down than something as involved as WWE 2K24. The other pro for Fight Forever is just that it's an AEW game. This means that we get some pretty wacky match types like the exploding barbed wire death match, and you get access to the AEW roster. Since I've gotten back into wrestling, I've definitely favored the WWE, but AEW can be really good sometimes, and some of their stars like Darby Allin, Kenny Omega, and Will Ospreay are just names that you'd love to play if you're diving into a wrestling game. But having the AEW stank on the game is a sword that cuts both ways, because this is where the cons start. First of all, I cannot stand the cartoony style that this game presents. The characters' proportions are so weird, they look like AEW skins released in Fortnite. They honestly kind of remind me of those wrestler thumb toys that you'd get for like 99 cents at the store in the 2000s. Contrasted with how damn good the 2K games have started to look recently, it just leaves everything feeling off. The game also just doesn't have as much to do as its biggest competition. In Fight Forever, when we're in a match, our goal is either to pinfall our opponent or throw them out of the ring. We can weaken them and pull off moves by pressing the face buttons. We can execute strikes, strike combos. We can grapple our opponent and send them into a different move entirely, Irish whip them, pull off a dive from the turnbuckle, all sorts of stuff. But the low barrier to entry that Fight Forever offers ends up biting it in the end. Because once you've put any time into this game, you start to hit a wall pretty quickly. It just feels like a formality rather than this massive sandbox that you can do anything with. Stages are pretty limited, match types are pretty limited. There just really isn't enough to do here to warrant a $40 price tag. It feels like Fight Forever was just a way to appease people that wanted to play AEW wrestlers in a wrestling game. And at that point, you might as well just download the created characters in WWE 2K24. But perhaps the worst part of Fight Forever is just how limited its character creator is. We can barely customize the hair or the face of our wrestler. There's only a few options here to choose from, and the clothes choices are just abysmal. There's like 30 different pants options that are just different flags plastered on shorts. And this is the part where I would normally say that obviously the WWE 2K games are going to be better because they've been developing that series for so long. But UK's, the developer of AEW Fight Forever, was the developer of 2K games up until 2019. They aren't new to developing wrestling games whatsoever, so the experience is there. And I have to imagine that at the end of the day, that this is a budgetary issue, and that AEW didn't even want to try to compete with the fidelity or accuracy of the 2K series, so they opted for a more arcadey style. And I'm sure that will appeal to some, because this game is sort of a throwback to old Japanese pro wrestling games from UK's past. But it really just wasn't for me. Also, there's this whole section of crazy mini games, like a rhythm game where you have to match the poses that Penta does, or count the number of trash cans around the ring. It's really strange. This also brings up the fact that the game has already aged extremely poorly because so many of the big stars present in this game have gone to WWE at this point. People like CM Punk, Jade Cargill, and Ricky Starks, to name a few. At the end of the day, if I'm going to pick up a wrestling game these days, it's probably going to be one of the more recent 2K games, but that's just my taste. Fight Forever isn't all terrible, but it doesn't appeal to me specifically. If you are a really big AEW fan and you like the more cartoony, arcadey style, then this will probably fit the bill for you. Scotland Yard Hunting Mr. X is a digital board game developed by Corion Interactive. It was released on October 14th, 2024 and currently has negative review status on Steam with 11 total reviews, 18% of those being positive. Scotland Yard Hunting Mr. X is a video game version of a board game by the same name. I had never actually heard of the board game before this video. The game itself is pretty simple. A variety of players control detectives in Scotland Yard that are on the hunt for Mr. X. One player controls Mr. X, whose goal is to evade the detectives at all costs. The detectives can win the game by surrounding or occupying the same space as Mr. X, and Mr. X can win the game by avoiding the detectives until they run out of available moves. Both teams move around the board by using tickets. Taxi tickets allow us to travel on a yellow line on the board. Bus tickets allow us to travel on a blue line, and underground tickets allow us to travel far across the board on the red lines. Detectives have a limited number of these tickets and can't gain them back. Mr. X has an unlimited number of tickets, thus being able to constantly outrun the detectives. The detectives can't see where Mr. X is at any given time, but every few turns his position will be revealed to them for one turn. Detectives can also see what tickets Mr. X used on his turns, but not where he was using them to go. This means that detectives have to use his most recent position and his trajectory to determine where he could have gone, and try to cut him off. Mr. X has a couple special tickets that he can use though. One special ticket will allow him to move anywhere without the detectives seeing which ticket he used, and the other allows him to make 2 moves in one turn, effectively obscuring one of his ticket uses. That's about the end of the rules for this game though. Scotland Yard Hunting Mr. X is really not a super complex affair, and that works greatly in its favor. The game is pretty easy to understand, but the level of thought that you need to put into things can go quite far. Trying to plot out where Mr. X could have gone based on the information that you have is a really engaging aspect of the game, and the inverse is true as well. Trying to figure out where the detectives think you're going to go takes a lot of thought. As Mr. X, you have to actually try and be unpredictable. You have to try and outthink a team of opponents and prove their theories wrong. The basic game itself seems like it would actually be pretty fun to play with a group of friends, but the digital version of the game is where things start to go wrong. Most of the big complaints that I've seen with this game come from the fact that this version has no online mode, which makes total sense. Not having online matches sort of cripples a digital board game's ability to reach a wider audience, because at that point, why not just get the board game itself? The other big complaint that I've seen about the game is the fact that the AI is terrible. When you're playing on the side of the detectives, you really have to work together to try and catch Mr. X. You need to plot out his moves and determine a few possible locations that he could have gone. Then you send your detectives to those different areas and try to cut him off from moving any further. But the AI genuinely just stays in one corner and moves around there forever. You would think that when his position is revealed, they would all at least flock to that position, but they don't. They just stay near the spot where they spawned and don't even move towards him. This means that when you're playing as Mr. X, there's really no challenge at all. You can just stay in one area and end up winning the game. So you can't play the game online, and there's really no point to playing the game against the AI, so the only solution is to play the game against others locally. But again, why not just buy the actual board game at that point? I guess the digital version has the advantage of less setup time, but it's not such a large advantage over the physical version that it becomes a huge selling point. Scotland Yard Hunting Mr. X is a decent game, but all of the good parts of this game come from the board game that it's based on. It fails in nearly every other area that concerns being an actually competent digital board game. Highway Police Simulator is an open-world action-adventure game developed by Z Software and was released on December 5th, 2024. It currently has mostly negative review status on Steam, with 198 total reviews, 29% of those being positive. I'm not sure why Highway Police Simulator decides to market itself as a simulator game, because it really doesn't feel like any simulator game that I've played before. The game actually takes place in a town called Kamanora and sees us playing a new police officer who quickly gets wrapped up in tracking down a ring of criminals. At the beginning of the game, we create our officer and actually have the option of deciding if they're the kid of a cop or someone that grew up on the streets. This is supposed to affect how criminals or other officers treat you, but I think this just results in small optional conversations later in the game. At least that was all I noticed.
What's up?
Just checking on you.
What, are you my boss now? Go annoy someone else.
Fine. Bye.
Beat it.
At the start of the game, we're tasked with protecting a transport bus full of prisoners, which our character quickly fails at as the bus is attacked. We crash, and a prisoner is stolen. We then have to investigate the scene of the crime and make a report. This is done by talking to individuals around the scene of the crime, picking up various objects, and making a sketch of the crime scene. At this point, the game kind of opens up a little bit. We can take on the main story, or we can try to solve various procedural crimes like accidents or shootings. The first complaint I have with this game is that it runs like absolute shit. I tried messing with the settings, tweaking various options, but nothing worked. Even setting everything to off or low still made the game slow down in certain places. This would often happen when driving on the highway and when the game felt the need to spawn in 400 cars at once, backed up because of a traffic incident. This game also has a surprising amount of little cutscenes and conversations. Some of the voice actors are far more competent than others, but for some reason, most of the dialogue is cut off when switching from one character to the other.
More than an attempt, I'm afraid. One definitely got away, and others tried to.
Besides that, our car is trashed. Can you fetch a ride for it?
You can just take mine when you're done here. I'll just go back with someone else. Don't worry.
Thanks a lot, Gary. Mind if we take the securing gear out of your car, too?
The end of their sentence just isn't allowed to finish. It almost seems like I'm skipping the dialogue in this footage, but I'm not. That's just how the game is. This game mostly surprised me, though, with just how ambitious it was. At certain points during the story, you can make decisions, like when I pulled this guy over for speeding, he tried to bribe me.
People will profit. You might profit as well. You see, How about an exchange? You keep the speeding ticket, and instead accept these 2 tickets for the Supersonic Mosquitoes show next weekend.
And of course, I wanted to see the Supersonic Mosquitoes next weekend, so I took his bribe, obviously. Later in the story, you find out that this man, Zach Mercer, is a big supporter of the station, and the chief thanks you for letting him off the hook. I'm sure that I would have been scolded had I given him a ticket. There's also a pretty in-depth system that comes with pulling people over. You can review their documents, you can look for discrepancies, check their trunk for anything suspicious, and even administer DUI tests, which is just absolutely wild. At a certain point in the story, you have to go undercover and talk to an agent who's infiltrated the local underground. To do this, you have to switch to civilian clothes and get a civilian car. Unfortunately, this requires doing challenge missions in the game, which are these just really short, boring races or shooting galleries. Speaking of, the shooting in this game is god-awful. There's so much recoil on the basic pistol, it's so difficult to aim, and every single enemy is just a bullet sponge. Even random thugs that aren't wearing vests can somehow take 20 bullets straight to the chest without going down. All that being said, this game is not good at all. Like I said, the game runs terribly, the driving is super janky, the shooting feels terrible, the controls are awkward and clunky, the performances and writing is awful. It seems like the writing was even worse at some point in development because none of the subtitles match up with what the actors are actually saying. It seems like the dialogue was changed during VO to actually flow better because the way it's actually written is completely broken.
Whatever you do, make sure to get her and don't cause any mess. This is our PD's highest profile case right now.
The game also just ends up really tedious at certain points, like having to switch out cars or clothes requires you to actually go into the station and navigate its confusing halls over and over. I've actually played another Z Software game in this series before, Autobahn Police Simulator. This game seems to be a larger evolution of that series. That game allowed you to do similar things, pull cars over and question suspects. But this game takes that idea steps and steps further. And it seems like it would have been a better idea to try and nail down that smaller scope idea first, before trying to create a massive GTA clone with huge scope creep, because Highway Police Simulator, while I respect its ambition, just has way too many systems that are all poorly done. I'd rather they had a few systems that were polished and worked well together, rather than a ton that just barely work at all. I mean, hell, there's an overworld morality system in this game, which is just insane. The developers released a roadmap for the game when it came out, but they're already past that in terms of updates. The most recent update was mostly just bug fixes, and I'm sure that the game was worse at some point, but that doesn't mean that it's exactly in a fully playable state right now. Poker Train is a card game developed by TTL-CIC that was released on December 12th, 2024. The game currently has negative review status on Steam with 11 total reviews, 18% of those being positive. Poker Train in its most basic form is a video poker game. Poker Train attempts to revolutionize the formula of video poker games by adding the framing element of a train conductor to its format. Imagine a fantasy world where chugging trains and locomotives are not powered by the fuel of burning wood, coal, and oil, but by successfully making poker hands. This is the world that we are thrust into when playing Poker Train. At the bottom of the screen, we will be dealt cards. Every time we choose to deal a new hand of 5 cards from a standard deck, we bet a certain amount of chips, anywhere from 10 to 50. After getting our initial 5 cards, we can choose to hold any of these cards and replace the remaining unheld cards. If the final 5 cards that we're left with form a hand from the list of hands on the left side of the screen, then we earn a certain amount of chips based on how valuable that hand is, and the train at the top of the screen moves forward a bit. These hand types start at a pair of jacks or any higher value card and go all the way up to a royal flush. If we don't manage to make any of these hands, then we lose the chips that we wagered and our train stays stationary. As the train moves across the top of the screen, it will encounter various roadblocks. We will have to take on quests at certain points that require us to form a scoring hand with a specific card or suit. For example, if the quest requires that we play a 10, then we have to have a scoring hand with a 10 in it. This could mean that we have a pair of aces and a 10 is just there. The 10 doesn't have to actually be involved in the scoring part of the hand. And the same goes for any cards or suits required. As long as they're in the hand, it counts. We'll also come across chests that will drop loot. This loot is provided to us in various tiers, from 1 to 4. This loot can be converted into cash, which can be used to upgrade our train. These upgrades are permanent and can give us things like an increase to the value of our face cards when completing quests, or an increase to the amount of chips that we start with. We can also come across shops that will allow us to trade cards for certain bonuses and loots. Just below the train are the bonuses that we've banked. The bonus modifier will give us extra chips for our scored cards. The go to modifier will advance our train to the next roadblock. The wild will allow us to replace a card, and the jump will allow us to skip a quest in our path. We lose Poker Train when we run out of chips. If we no longer have enough chips to wager, then we start back from the beginning with any permanent buffs that we've gained still intact. Poker Train isn't a bad idea or even really that bad of a game in general. I could nitpick the UI design, which I think is far too busy for its own good. Some of these buttons and pieces of information could definitely go into submenus for just a better general cohesion, but I think the game has at least something going for it. Obviously, any sort of video poker games are pretty trendy right now, with Balatro being such a huge success. I don't think this game is really trying to steal from Balatro too much, maybe some slight inspiration in the initial concept, but that's mostly where it begins and ends. This game has its roots far more in traditional video poker than anything else, and that sort of works to its detriment. First of all, having only one redraw after the initial hand holds this game back quite a bit. It's incredibly difficult to actually draw any high-value hands. Getting a full house or a flush in 2 draws is pretty difficult on its own, but getting a royal flush is damn near impossible. Obviously, this can be offset by wilds and various bonuses or upgrades that you'll get as the game goes on, but the progression system is really slow. It feels like it takes forever to actually get those permanent upgrades, leaving us grinding for pairs and 3-of-a-kinds, which barely get us any sort of return on our ante. There's also this very strange fuel system that I was never really clear on. So at one point while playing the game, I used my fortune roll, which is a little wheel spin that you get every 50 rounds. I ended up landing on 2,000 chips, which gave me a ton of room to bet and play around with the game, but I ended up getting stuck on a quest for a few rounds and the game just ended. Even though I had a ton of chips left in my bank, the game will eventually end if you run out of fuel or if the train isn't moving for too long or something. The game doesn't really explain anything at all. There's no tutorial or main menu, you just get dropped right into this screen when you boot up the game. It's really odd because this game is like a few balance changes shy of being incredibly addicting. I wasn't quite stuck in a loop where I wanted to keep playing it forever, but I was always on the edge of quitting. It fell on the opposite side of the spectrum of a game that I couldn't put down. It was still keeping me playing and I didn't want to stop quite yet, but I was always a bad move away from throwing it away. With a few changes, I think the game could easily end up on the other side of that spectrum. I think the progression in the beginning of the game needs to speed up quite a bit to keep people interested. The game would have to reduce the price of the initial permanent upgrades, introduce a third draw into the main video poker mechanic to give players a bit more agency, and explain the fuel system more clearly, and I actually might put some significant time into this game. I should also note that Poker Train is actually free as well, so if this looks even slightly interesting to you, I would at least give it a try. It seems the developer is still actively updating the game as recently as the end of January 2025. I didn't hate Poker Train at all. I actually think it's really close to being a pretty enjoyable game. The team just needs to make some tweaks, and they could have something pretty fun on their hands. Town Market Simulator 2025 is a game developed by Yusuf Islam Seyhan and Samet Akar. It was released on February 6, 2025 and currently has mostly negative review status on Steam with 11 total reviews, 27% of those being positive. While I made the case earlier in this video that Real Pharmacy Simulator was taking inspiration from simulator games like TCG Card Shop Simulator, Town Market Simulator 2025 is just straight up trying to rip games like that off and doing it very poorly. The basic framework of the game is exactly the same. Stock the shelves with products that customers will enter the store and buy, check them out at the register, change prices on the shelves to generate as much profit as possible, rinse and repeat. Except that Town Market Simulator 2025 is worse in just about every single way. In TCG Card Shop Simulator, we use our phone to access a variety of different websites that we can use to buy more floor space in the store, to run tournaments, to buy new pieces of furniture for the store, to order stock, hire employees, etc. Town Market Simulator 2025 does not have a phone like this. It literally just has one screen with no labeling or explanation that lists products that we can buy. These are all products that we can buy from the start of the game, also with no labeling, just prices. We can order these items and they will appear outside of our gas station only after a certain amount of time. So we just have to wait for this stuff to show up, which is really slow and brings the game to a screeching halt. We can deal with customers when they come into the store and check them out, and just like in TCG Card Shop Simulator, they can either use cash or credit. If they use cash, we give them the change they need. If they use credit, we're fucked. This is because there's a game-breaking bug still in the game. See, you have to enter the total amount for the order on the keypad. If this matches the number on the screen, then you've checked the customer out and they leave. But there's a problem. On the screen, the total uses a decimal point to note the end of a dollar amount and the beginning of cents. The keypad only has a comma button, not a decimal point. I'm assuming they coded the game to compare these two strings and whether they're matching, and since they are technically not matching, you can't ever check someone out if they're using a card. This is the video game version of our card machine is down, except it's always down, and the customer won't leave. This prevents you from ever continuing in the game if someone decides to use a card. Because of this, I had to get creative with the way that I played this game. First of all, I figured out that the entire town around the gas station is explorable. You can literally walk all the way down the street and around the block for no reason, because there's nothing out here. Well, actually that's wrong, because there is a guy playing bongos in his front yard, and he has two guys fist fighting beside him. Another interesting thing I found was that you can basically push cars around because they have no weight to them. You can just run into them and even flip them over if you hit them right. I eventually created my own goal for this game, which was to fill this shelf entirely with biscuits. Any customer that entered the store was my enemy because they could be wielding my kryptonite, which was a debit card. So I ignored my enemies and focused on building my biscuit empire, which was eventually successful. At this point, I considered my goal complete and the game was beaten. In all seriousness, this game is a very shallow ripoff of another very successful game, and this two-man team of developers are no stranger to this. The publisher for their games are listed as Inspector Studios, and they have released over 40 different games on Steam, all just various cash grabs and unfinished projects. Most of their games are only listed for 99 cents, but be honest with yourself. These people are chasing the success that other games have had. They've realized that games like TCG Card Shop Simulator have made hundreds of thousands of dollars and decided that they could do the same thing. They could recreate the same magic and get those same sales. But they don't realize there's a lot more work that goes into something like that than they would think. Also, the reason that Card Shop Simulator is successful is not just because you're stocking shelves, it's because those developers combined two incredibly addicting gameplay loops: card collecting and simulating store management. If this game was finished, then at least you could take pride in it. At least it would be a complete project. I mean, hell, there's a gas station attached to this store. Why is there not a mechanic to check people out that are buying gas? Why use a gas station if you aren't going to actually use the gas station? This game is just another example of someone trying to cash in on recent trends without realizing why they worked in the first place. And with that, we've talked about another 10 of the worst reviewed games on Steam. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out the other ones in this series, and consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel, as it really helps me out. If you want to support the channel further, you can subscribe to my Patreon like all these people did, where I offer early access to my videos and some exclusive content. Recently, I've started going through the Resident Evil movies and posting video reviews of each film. Also, if you have any poorly reviewed Steam games that you'd like me to check out, be sure to post them in the comments. Thanks again for watching. Bye, Dad.